and I'm very proud to introduce J Michelle Swope as my first guest speaker. She showed up, which is amazing. That's good. Not that I had any doubt, but you just never know. So I met J Michelle August of 2016 at a Women for Wild Fish meeting in Maupin. I didn't know what a steelhead was. I just had been given a crosswater setup by my dad. It was a whole new world to me. And J Michelle was one of the speakers at the event. I thought I was going to fish, but apparently no one was fishing. And basically opened my eyes to a little bit of conservation, a little bit of United Women on the Fly, and a whole lot of fun. J Michelle is out of Olympia, and she'll explain what she does and how she does it. And I hope you enjoy her presentation. How many people are at Pringle?
I hope that was my cue to start.
Yes, thank you. We're ready for it.
Thank you so much, Shandy and Tim and the rest of you for inviting me to come and talk to you this evening. I'm very passionate about many things around fishing, and to be able to talk to similar folks that have similar passions around fly fishing and conservation is always such a treat and a joy. And I always go away with just a renewed spirit of energy and to continue to do great work and continue to talk to people about fish and how we can continue to fish for them and have it be ecologically sound. And then I always learn something too. So I'm just so excited. So if you'll indulge me, my apologies, but I can't see you. And Tim and I were talking about technology. And so my apologies, but I'm going to ask you to hold your questions till the end of the presentation. Normally a super welcome interruption, but not being able to see is a little bit of a challenge. So forgive me in advance. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about myself. So that's me on the left, just in case you're curious. Also on the right, and also on the right bottom. But here's the deal. I grew up on the north end of the Hood Canal, which is what we like to here in Washington call the Big Fjord. And it connects way up top near Port Townsend, Port Angeles areas to the Puget Sound. But I grew up where a very long bridge connects the Kitsap Peninsula to the Olympic Peninsula. So I grew up on the saltwater of the Hood Canal, but very close to the Olympic Mountains, and the Olympic Mountains remain my home. I grew up hunting and fishing and running all over the OP, and I really do consider it definitely my home. I started fishing when I was like 3, and I remember only because I caught a fish and it was very impactful and I was pretty dang delighted. I grew up on a farm in Kitsap County, right there on the Hood Canal. Had 5 kids, and my mom was stay-at-home mom, and my dad was a police officer. So we ran a farm, and my mom wrangled 5 children while dad brought home just a cop's salary. But fishing really stuck with me, and it really resonated with me more than any of my other siblings. Being second to the youngest, I had a little bit more time with my dad right after he graduated the academy and started being a police officer. So it was sort of natural that he and I just started to fish together. So when I was 7 years old, he took me to some lakes over in Eastern Washington there. Lake Lanice and Lenore are there. And he had worked all night and driven us there in the morning. He said, "Hey, please go fish in your little canoe. Do not wake me up because I've worked all night and I'm exhausted. I need to sleep." So I was like, "Yeah, that's great." So I got my canoe and I got it all down and I got in it. I started paddling around and I had my spinner and I had my lure going, and down the lake, I could see these two people, and they were like doing this weird deal where they were like waving these long sticks in the air. And I was kind of fascinated, but also sort of like, what the heck? But here's the deal, they're the only ones catching fish. So, because apparently I was a super good listener at 7, I busted back to shore, ran up and shook the van to get my dad up and out of bed. Which, by the way, wasn't the best idea I ever had because he was a cop, if you'll recall. So he came out full, like guns blazing, like, what's wrong? What's wrong? And I was like, no, nothing's wrong. It's just that there are these guys on the lake and they're catching fish. And I don't know how they're doing it. Can you tell me what it is? And he said, well, that's fly fishing. And I was like, oh, I have to do that. And he said, well, I don't know how, but we'll figure it out. So a week later, my dad brought me home my very first fly rod. And I've never been the same. I should also share with you that a week after that, my dad also brought me home a fly tying kit, which caused a bit of a problem because I started to cut hair off horses and cows and things, which is great, which is fine. I didn't know what I was doing. This is pre-internet, so I was just trying to match what was in these beautiful pictures of different flies to what I was doing on the vise until supper time when my mom sat us down and said, kids, we're gonna have to put the dog down. And we were like mortified. I was like, what's wrong with the dog? And mom said, well, kids, the dog has mange. And we said, well, what is mange? And she said, well, I don't know, but he's missing chunks of hair. And that's when I like just had to lower my head and raise my hand and admitting that I was the one taking chunks of hair out of the dog. The dog was fine. So anyway, roadkill and dogs and other things have not been safe since, but it's all good. I started to really become interested as my fly fishing journey progressed. I really got interested in both fly fishing and conservation. It was really, I could never separate the two and still can't. And so I spend a lot of my time running around both Washington and Oregon, fishing and working on different conservation projects and trying to convince others to do the same, both in terms of conservation of our land and our cold, clean water and our native wild fish. I work currently for myself. I run Olympia Only Women on the Fly guide service, and I do a lot of teaching around fly tying and casting and such. And then I also work for a nonprofit, the Fish Society, that works to bolster native runs of wild Anadromous fish. So just in a nutshell, that's just who's talking to you today. I do want to share that upper right picture of me with that really beautiful trout, that was caught on a size 16 Dark Lord, and I was on the Rogue, and I had no idea the Rogue had trout that big. That was very exciting. And then the lower right, that's me on the glorious Hoh River, which has had some beleaguered and troubled times of late. It's still a beautiful river. And that gorgeous dog that you see down there, where he dug his little bed in the sand there, that's Duncan James, and he's the best fishing dog in the world and my pretty much constant companion. So hopefully that just gave you a taste of me, and now I'm going to talk to you about why you have me here this evening, and that is we're going to do a little bit of education and thinking and planning about how to find, fish for, and conserve coastal cutthroat trout. So this is a fairly popular graphic, and I always like to include it, however, to let folks know what we're talking about. Coastal cutthroat trout, this is their distribution. They're found from almost the tip of the Aleutian Islands up there past Anchorage in Alaska, down to very near and a little bit beyond the Eel River in California. If you took a map of the temperate rainforest and laid it over this orange map of our trout, coastal cutthroat trout distribution, they're identical. Also, and this is amazing to me, coastal cutthroat, we have found them dating back to the Ice Age. So they have been around longer than a lot of fish that we know a lot more about. Coastal cutthroat are wonderful to fish for. They're very interesting creatures, and they have a storied history that we are still trying to understand. Here in Washington State, and I'm just going to preface this and tell you that the reason that I'm setting you up is that we're going to talk about how to find them and fish for them, but it's important that we understand where they came from and why we do what we do. So in Washington State, coastal cutthroat management in saltwater went like this. In 1955, they were like, yeah, take 15 fish, don't exceed 7.5 pounds plus a fish. 1973, 6 pounds plus one fish. Still could take them. 1980, 2 fish over 10 inches. 86, 2 fish over 12 inches. 1987, 2 fish over 14, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right around 1988, we started to hip up to the fact that we were taking a lot of cutthroat trout out of saltwater, and that could become an issue. We began to lobby that Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife allow in saltwater, mandate catch and release only. It was a fight, and we ended up winning that fight. And I'm happy to say that still today, we are strictly catch and release with sea run cutthroat when they're in marine water. But as you can imagine, we don't know enough about them to mandate taking them as they go up to spawn in freshwater, but that is still allowed in most of our coastal streams. So the sort of tension between recreational fishing, conservation, and science-based decisions continues. And it continues certainly with our coastal cutthroat trout. Okay. So I've done a lot of work with WDFW as a volunteer. I've done a lot of work with our Coastal Cutthroat Coalition, and they are running a 3-year study on the coastal cutthroat and where they spawn and when and where they go. There's not a lot, we don't know a lot about coastal cuts when they hit the saltwater. We can track them, and we do, when they are coming into spawn. But once they go back out into the salt, we don't really know how far they travel or where they go. So folks are still trying to figure out answers to those questions, thereby then hopefully making informed decisions around catch and release or catch and keep. What type of zones do we need to protect along the coastlines? What's going on in our rivers that may be affecting fish as they spawn, et cetera, et cetera. They are one of the most one of the most understudied anadromous fish that we have in the West. So it's something that we're still considering and thinking about. But this graph is to show you something, and that is to say that we're looking at a fishery that currently is year-round. I can go out anytime I want, and I can fish for sea run cutthroat. There's no season on it. So that's great. It's wonderful to have a year-round fishery so close to me. I live within 7 minutes of a beach that I can be into coastal cuts in like 10 minutes. So I feel very privileged. But there is a time when they're more prolifically in the saltwater. And so this is one of the things that I like to share with folks. If you're thinking about coming up to the Puget Sound and doing some great fishing, this might be something that would interest you. So on the left, you see the green line. It's chum, and it's chum salmon or dog salmon, if you will. And our salmon had a very definitive and sharp spike around coming into spawn and then either returning to sea or dying. And that's November, December. So that's like maybe 6 weeks of time when the majority of our chum salmon come in and spawn. As opposed to, compared to our sea run cutthroat trout that don't really have much of a real major timing around spawning. So you'll see that they start February-ish. There's a lot of spawning going on between March and April. And although it drops down, it goes on into May. And in fact, the last graph I had that I saw that hasn't been published yet, but I saw it from Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife, is that they were even counting like spawning was still occurring in some of their streams into June. So what that is interesting is that what makes that so interesting is that when we are looking for fishing for our cutthroat, this might help inform us about where we go and when we go on the Puget Sound. And by the way, when I say South Puget Sound, I am including the Hood Canal, which is our big fjord, which Coastal Cutthroat Coalition is doing a big study on. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But so that's just an interesting thing to note. If I am going to advise anyone around the absolute best time to fish for these beautiful creatures, it's going to be October through March. That's when the largest amount of them are present in the saltwater near the beaches that we can access. Yes, they are in saltwater year round, and yes, you can find them. But if you want to like really improve your chances, that would be the time frame that you would want to be looking at. I wanted to show you this because this is incredible. So this is a sea run cutthroat, and it's the same fish. She was first caught and tagged in November of 2016. Look how skinny she is. And then in the same beach, the same mouth of a small stream, she was caught again and tagged again the very next month. And look how much fatter she is. By the following April, she had shoulders. She is massive. She had been eating like crazy with all these great foods that were available starting towards the end of November and into April. And by April time, when potentially she's getting ready to go up and spawn, she's been gorging on chum salmon fry. So she is just fat, healthy, and happy. And what's interesting about these fish is that I could, and as seen by this example, this fish was caught 3 times on a fly rod. She wasn't caught in a netting event where we seine for them, take samples, tag them, let them go. She bit 3 times in the same area. So what this has begun to show us, and we have proof of this from doing seining with net events, is that these fish are very, 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 they have a lot of breeding fidelity, which means that they will hang out around the places from which they spawned quite a bit. So she came down the river, down the creek, she hung out in that area until it was time for her to go back up again. So the question, and that's a great thing to know as a guide and a fisherman, right? That's a wonderful thing to know. It's like, oh man, I know where fish are going to be. And I know now that because of tagging, I'm going to get the same fish. But there are pros and cons to this. And that's the thing I kind of want to talk about just a little. Is that, you know, I know where to find her, but how many times can I catch her and not do any harm? So that's an interesting thing that I know that folks who, like myself, who recreate and guide in the South Puget Sound, Hood Canal, we consider. And that's an interesting thing to just sort of keep in mind. So where, honestly though, where do we typically find our sea run cutthroat trout in South Puget Sound? Well, the Puget Sound is 95 miles long and anywhere from 1 to 5 miles wide. Hood Canal is 68 miles long and only about 1.5 miles to 2 miles wide. The canal, though, is so deep, you know, we have a submarine base on it. So there's a lot of diverse foliage, there's a lot of diverse water, there's a lot of diverse environments for us to get through to try and find some coastal cutthroats. But I'm going to share with you what I've learned over time and what I continue to learn as we fish for these dynamic and beautiful fishies. So the where. So sea-run coastal cuts, and I'll talk to you more about this in a minute, but they eat things that either predate on or are shellfish. So they are going to be close to shore and in and near beaches where shellfish are present. And by shellfish are present, I just mean when you're walking down to the beach or you're looking on Google Earth and expanding your view, zooming in, you're seeing oyster shells, clam shells, mussels, you're seeing presence of shellfish, okay? What is not optimal is mud. So because coastal cuts eat things that are along the shoreline and typically migrate along the shoreline, mud doesn't really hold much nutrients for them, so they're not going to really hang out in the mud. So if you say find a beach that has public access and it has a little bit of gravel, but then as you start to wade in, you're sinking in mud, chances are that is not the beach for you. The other thing to know about our coastal cuts is that they tend to hang out. Remember our very healthy female we saw back there a couple slides ago. They tend to hang out where either present or historical streams ran into the salt water. Now, when I say streams, I could say, well, depending on what region of the US you're from, I could say creeks, I could say creeks, I could say little rivulets. Just anywhere there is some fresh water that either historically had or currently does dump into the salt, you're going to find sea-run cuts nosed up to that. And that is something. So when we look maybe for the trifecta of looking for a beach that might yield us some fish to play with us, we're going to look for shellfish presence. We're going to look for the absence of mud, and we're going to look for the presence of either current or historical streams. And by historical streams, I also want to share with you that that could be just seasonal. Like it could be a stream that has dried up in the summer. It doesn't matter. Those fish will still be there nosed up to that. When? Well, I covered that a little bit. Year round for sure. By the way, up here in the South Puget Sound, we have a year-round resident coho run. So the Squaxin Island tribe has a hatchery for coho salmon, silver salmon. And well, I want to say 14, 15 years ago now, there was it was a mistake that they were released. And then it was such a good deal and fishermen were so excited about it, they kept that running ever since. Happily, we've not seen any ecological issues with that. Also happily, we tend to catch, along with our sea-run cutthroats, some very hefty resident coho salmon on the same 6 weight we're using for our cutthroat. They don't get as big as our coho that run in the ocean. And they're a little bit cookie cutter, but boy, howdy are they great and fun. And they're quite girthy. So they'll be maybe 14, 16, 18 even inches long. But compared to their sea-run cuts they're running with, they get really fat. So that can be a really great time. So fishing, back to sea-run cuts, though, fishing for them year round for sure. But October through April is especially good. October is great. We start trying to use squid patterns and things that imitate some smaller like bait fish. Going into like February, March, when the baby chum fry, the little chum salmon fries start to dump out into the salt, and cutthroat are gobbling them up. And then into April, when we start to see our polychaete worms migrate and spawn, I'll show you those in a sec. And that is also a really great time to fish. And we'll look at what all those type of things kind of resemble. So you're looking at the pictures here. This is me with my friend Judy Graham, who's a wonderful woman. She was my casting instructor mentor for years and just fantastic. And then she decided to become a snowbird and moved to Palm Beach, I guess. No, Palm Desert. Yeah, and I'm still bitter. But anyway, she's wonderful. This is her 2 November. This is the day after Thanksgiving, and it's snowing on us. And this is us catching both sea run cuts and our resident coho. And that's my friend Josh in the background. But this was a really fun day, and it's so magical. I mean, we live in the great PNW, and one of my favorite things, and I don't know if you've experienced, but I absolutely love it, is fishing in the snow. It's nothing like it, really. We're already warm. We've already got the appropriate gear on, so we're standing in the water in the middle of November because we're dorks, or even January. But when that snow starts to drop and it hisses on the water, it's a magical thing. I love it so much. So, but that was a great day. We caught a lot of fish, and here's what we did to try and ensure that we would catch fish. We went on the incoming tide because we happen to know that beach, and we know that fishing for them on that day on that beach, they enjoy incoming versus outgoing tide. How do we know that? Just experience fishing that beach on both incoming and outgoing, and then figuring out that here in this water, their food sources, as the tide comes in, their food sources move in and they come in after it. The other thing about when is tides, and I just want to touch on that real briefly. Coastal cutthroat trout love moving water, love it. They're not too interested in hanging out close to the beach at slack tide. They need water moving either in or out from the beach. And then also we look for the rips when that happens, and I have a picture of what that is. So just to review, the when, year round certainly, but October through April is especially good, depending on the beach, either incoming or outgoing tide, parentheses, never slack. That's when you either want to nap or eat some lunch or have a cigar, whatever works for you. Rest that casting arm. And they love moving water. Let's move on. So how? This is a good one. I couldn't resist using the picture of this cat because it made me laugh. No idea what the brown speck is that the cat's stalking, but it's obvious that the cat's stalking. So the how of coastal cutthroat fishing: stealth, style, and themes. And I just want to share with you a couple of things. First of all, when we're looking, if we are going to walk onto a beach and we are looking for where the fish might be, there are a couple of things we need to assess before we ever get up close to the water. We need to be looking for that shellfish presence, right? We need to be looking for where a stream, either historically or currently, has dumped into the salt water there. And then we also need to be paying attention to, is there any maybe beds of sea kelp or seaweed that I can see? What structure exists that potentially will be holding sea run cutthroat either around or underneath it? Sea kelp doubles as protection and also a food source for them because lots of marine creatures cling to sea kelp as they're growing to maturity. And so that's a great place that sea run cuts like to eat. Also, they hide underneath it or around it. It stops the tremendous predation on them from birds. I can't tell you how many sea run cuts I've caught with like beak marks in them. So while they try to not get predated on, I don't think they're that great at it, but that's something for another time. So stealth. So we need to be looking at the beach. And if we are not in a boat, if we are walking and waiting, we want to get on our knees or at least crouch down. We don't want to get very close to the water when we make our first cast. So routinely, I will not make my first cast closer to the beach than 10 feet. And this is why. Remember how I told you that they love moving water? Well, I could have a difference in current. Say the tide's going out, but I have a little bit of a riptide current here, and it's actually moving across the water, not just out with the tide. There's going to be fish in that disturbance, and they could be 3 feet from me, and I've actually caught them that far from me, 3 feet from me. I didn't even have to backcast, just flipped in my little fly and kaboom. Any place that you see that running water that is cross current or cross tide. But we need stealth. We need to be stealthy. The style part of this talk that I wanted to share with you today is that intermediate line is your best friend when you're fishing for sea run coastal cuts. You can use a floating line with a weighted fly, but it will be harder and you will not have the efficacy of getting down to where the sea run cuts are. So I included a little quick blurb here about Coastal Quick Sugar, which is my favorite line. And I'm not sponsored by Rio or anything. That's not why. I'm just going to tell you that Rio lines and I get along super well. I love them so much. And these are the ones that I would recommend were you going to go out and buy a new intermediate line for sea run cut. This is what I would recommend. And by the way, you don't really need anything beyond a 6 weight to fish for these fine fish. A 5 weight potentially is a little too small because remember we've got the resident coho. But cutthroats, I think the 6 is the perfect size rod for them. Just share. So that's a bit about style. Also around style, I want to share with you that the way in which we cast our bait fish patterns and other patterns out, and the way in which we retrieve is very important. Sea run cutthroats love to chase what's running away from them. So never will it be effective unless my fly is already in a rip current and the rip current's making it move, that I just cast out and hold still and hope something hits. I need to strip. I need to strip in about 14 inches and I need to strip sporadically. So if you can imagine like stripping like the 1, 2, and then wait for a second, and then 3, and then 1, 2, 3, that type of erratic stripping. Not only does that make your pattern look like it's wounded and the fish are going to be like, oh, yummy, but also that also attracts those coho like I was speaking about. So that's sort of like 2 things on style. And then those seams, and I'm hoping you can see this picture all right. And I'm confident most of you already know what I'm talking about. I just wanted to have a little bit of a visual there for that. So any place that we see that the water is behaving differently from the rest of the water, those are seams, and that's what we're looking for. Similar to foam lines in the river, we are looking for seams in the saltwater. So, and we want to fish them similarly. So here's the what. Now, you know as well as I do, there's a million flies with a million different names for a lot of really the same fish. And actually, as time goes by and we fish around the United States and maybe the world, you start to recognize that, oh, you know what? The fly that I'm using for this bonefish looks a lot like the fly that I use for a sea run cutthroat, or that I used for a coho. We start to see real similarities. And there's a great reason for that. But I do want to share with you, first of all, before I get into the actual what the fly is, I'm going to give you the what and the why. Okay. So what do our coastal cuts eat and how do we match the hatch in the South Puget Sound? Well, we've got about 3 profiles, main profiles of bait in the Puget Sound. We have a teardrop shape, which is like a sculpin, which is the lower left picture. We have a long and skinny shape, which is like the top right picture, which is the sun lance, by the way. We have a typical bait fish shape, which is the top left, which is like a smelt or herring. And then the long and skinny also counts for the worm there on the lower right, which is called the polychaete worm, which I'll refer to a lot and we'll come back to in a second. But as long as your fly meets one of these shape requirements, you can honest to Pete use whatever color you wish and the fish will likely eat it. So that's something to really know. So the smelt, the sand lance, the sculpin, polychaete worm, this makes up the majority of coastal cutthroat's diet. Okay. Woo. Okay. So now we're into the nitty gritty. So having said that, first of all, I'm going to tell you that every single one of the flies you're looking at here was either tied by or influenced by and or named by the original guide for coastal cutthroat in Washington State, Britta Fortis. Britta Fortis is an amazing person. She now currently is a fly designer and works for Rio. And there's not a fly that Rio puts out that she hasn't had some sort of either hand in developing or improving on. So the flies on the left, the 4 flies there that you see, those are flies that are imitating the polychaete. I'm going to go back for a second. Oh, sorry, guys. Do you see the polychaete worm on the right bottom of your screen, the right hand bottom? You see how it's long and, well, frankly, worm-like. That's what these 4 flies are imitating in different variations. Let me share something with you real quick about this type of a fly for sea run cutthroat trout. You never want to put a stinger hook on. And by a stinger hook, I mean a trailing hook on these. Because when sea run cuts eat and they're eating bait fish, they typically come from the side to stun and then gulp the fish. But when they're eating worms, they eat them from behind. And since we are catch and release in the salt for these guys, we do not want to have any gill plate or eye involvement with a stinger hook or trailing hook. So we don't want to tie them with these. And what you're looking at with these polychaete imitations is that that's about a size 4 Ahrex hook. And you can see that you can use just about any material you want, as long as the shape does what it's supposed to do, and as long as you're using an intermediate line and getting that worm close to the bottom and then working it through, you're going to catch fish. So that's the polychaete worm. The the next one we have is the very upper right, and that is an imitation of the smelt. That is on the upper left there. So this is Britta's fly, and she named it Just Keep Swimming. This is very, very famous, very popular bait pattern of fish. You can see it's just got it's got the striation in the middle, so it looks like par marks on a little bait fish, and then it has the nice different materials that are going to give it some like pop and some luster, and then she's got those nice big saltwater eyes on there and hits it with Sally Hansen or another type of clear resin cure. But that is a deadly pattern for these guys. And then down in the middle, we've got the Rio Clouser minnow, which again, you can catch fish on all around the world, but especially with these guys. And you know, the Clouser minnow is fun, but you could tie it in like all different color combinations. I mean, really, it's pretty great. And then the last one down there on the bottom, here on the left-hand side, you'll see sculpin there. On the right-hand bottom, that's our friend, the sculpinator. And sculpinator is that third shape that we're looking for, teardrop shape. And this sculpinator is Rio, was created by Britta, is a great fly. But as with all flies, as you already know, the pattern exists. We tweak them a little bit and we name them our own, right? But all of these are excellent patterns for catching our beloved sea run cuts. And they're all great imitations of most of the food sources that are in the Great South Puget Sound. Just another couple notes, and then I'm going to switch topics for a moment. We have other flies that we use for sea run cuts. We have topwater flies. We have so Leland Milwaukee, the famous, or he would probably say infamous, Orbis employee and fisherman here, Seattle area. He invented the Milwaukee popper, and it's like a bass popper that we use for cutthroat. And when we see topwater action, when they're really hitting the top, we can throw those with floating line and do quite well. And then we have some other sort of tricks up our sleeves around. So August, September, when the termites are spawning, flying ants. If you find madrona trees on a shoreline, termites gather there and then they drop into the water and can't swim, so they just go smack. We actually have patterns that imitate those termites, and sea run cuts can get really pretty excited about it. So just thought I'd share two little secret sauce type things that we can do. So please think on your questions about maybe sea run cuts. I did want to spend just a little bit of time telling you what other things, excuse me, I'm involved with, and wanted to just share a little bit with you. One of the great pleasures of my life, honestly, is being able to be part of an organization, United Women on the Fly. And this is an online, free to anyone meeting place that we have a rather robust website and lots of different resources. We started this in 2014. Well, so Heather Hodson, who's the founder of United Women, she started Spokane Women on the Fly. And 6 months later, I heard about that and called her on the phone and said, can I start a group called Olympia Women on the Fly? And she's like, oh, what a great idea. So we thought we were groovy and cool. And then she just like blew it up. She's like, wait a minute, why are we just talking about Washington? Why not go for broke? So she started United Women on the Fly, and currently, oh, I forgot to count. We've got, I think, 35 or 40 different sort of groups around not only the US, but Canada, Australia, and some places in the UK. And this was all sort of predicated on the fact that a lot of us women fly fish, but didn't know one another and didn't feel like, for whatever reason, when it came to fishing, we didn't feel like things were going the way they were optimal for us. It's like, I was like, wait a minute, when it comes to fishing, no one's in charge. There are no rules as to who can be on the water. Nevertheless, it doesn't feel that way. And kind of history shows us and tells us that unless you look a certain way, you don't really belong. That didn't stop us from fishing. And in fact, the advent of the internet sort of brought us together. And so it didn't stop folks that were on the fringe from fishing, but what it did do is exclude them from the conversation. So back in 2016, we really started to make a concerted effort to get more women into the sport. And we were following on the coattails of Trout Unlimited's national edict to get more women into fly fishing, or to not get, we already existed, but to be more welcoming and actually maybe, oh, I don't know, make waders that actually fit a woman and take into the account that we have hips, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we started. But that mission has since morphed, because as time went by, we became really successful. We found so many women all over the place that already fly fish. It was really great and fun to get together and fish together and talk online and do all the things. But then we realized that we were sort of missing some of our clientele. And that was when we started looking at the folks of color and how we were just a lot of very eager and well-meaning white women for the most part, but we needed to do something to be more inclusive. So it was we developed our mission, which is building on an inclusive community that educates, provides resources, encourages and connects anglers from all backgrounds in the sport of fly fishing. And we want to foster a sense of belonging by centering, valuing, and amplifying the voices, perspectives, and styles of underrepresented women. And then we acknowledge our events and photos shared likely take place on traditional unceded Indigenous lands. So we've done a lot of work. There's still work to be done around gender parity, but it's not the only thing that we're about. And interestingly, as we've gone through working with our diversity, equity, inclusion work in the outdoors, we realized that, you know what, we still need to have classes for only women, but we're going to say all genders are welcome for a lot of our stuff because we want to be more inclusive. We got to walk that talk. Another thing that was a bit controversial to begin with, but I'm very proud of, is that we talked about legal harvest of fish. Oddly, and I'm not sure why, but as a fly fisher person my almost entire life, and having known a lot of us for a long time, some folks tend to turn up their noses around harvest. But you know what? When it's okay to do, and when there's an abundance of fish, oh my gosh, we want to support that. That's those people's sustenance, and that is a right, and for some a right, and for some others a privilege. And just a little bit about the rest of the things that we're trying to do. We have a robust education program happening mostly online these days due to COVID. We are working towards accessible education that is gender inclusive and available to everyone. We have things such as Tuesday tips, free intro to fly fishing classes, online fly fishing classes. We acknowledge that there are some significant monetary and other barriers to fly fishing, so we offer scholarships. And one of the tenets of our existence is that we just don't shame. Our goal is to create a supportive community for learning and connected. So we don't support shaming or bullying. We are largely an online presence, and when that happens, one of our moderators will come out and say that's not okay. We choose to educate versus shame folks, which is really important. I'll give you an example. When about 3 years ago, a person was very excited coming up from Arizona, was on the Olympic Peninsula, caught a wild steelhead, and had it out of the water for the grip and grim photo. Well, in Washington State, it's illegal to have them out of the water. We did not shame her, we just did an education piece. And that, you know, is going to stick and make them more inclined to actually continue to participate. So that was just an example. We're big tenants of the science behind Keep Fish Wet, and we are media partners with them. And when we post photos, we do our best to have photos that are following the Keep Fish Wet tenets and scientifically proven ways in which we continue to fish recreationally, but return them largely unharmed to their environment. Like I mentioned before, we have fly fishing classes. You'll see on the upper left there. We do lots of silly things online, and it makes us all very happy. We do an international dance day and every other whatever international whatever day that someone's made up somewhere. We have a lot of postings online, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on our website. We do serious things like honoring veterans who served. We invite anyone that belongs to over our 16K now membership to, if they wish, declare that they were a veteran, and we honor them around Veterans Day. And then we do those education tips where it's like fish handling education brought to you, like Fish Handling Friday. And here's a great example of something we created around reducing landing fish quickly and not reducing overplaying it into exhaustion. So just a sort of a flavor of things that we offer online. And again, this is free for anyone to access. And then bringing it just back to me a little bit, this is what I do with my guide service. These are in-person opportunities I offer up here. And that is, I do Fly Fishing 101 and 202. I do some match the hatch type hands-on classes. I also do some casting drills and things of that nature. Beyond that, I, of course, do walk-in wade guide trips and now boat-based guided trips. One thing to know about me is that I'm in a bit of a transition. I was a river raft guide for many years with my beautiful raft and my awesome dog. And then a year ago, August, my back decided to throw a disc, and I've not really been the same since. So sold the raft, bought a boat that goes in salt water, and I'm off to new adventures. But tell you what, you know that thing I was mentioning about chasing sea run cutthroat, tide dependent, you can chase them a lot better in the boat. So I can promise you I'm having a good time. So with that, I promised Shandy that I would share a good picture of Duncan. This is Duncan James. He's my great boat dog. That's the raft I no longer have, but he is amazing and loves the new boat. Probably better than the raft, actually. So that's the end of my presentation. I do hope you enjoyed it. And now I would love to take some questions. And Tim, if you could help me so I could see people, that'd be amazing.
I'm going to stop your sharing, J Michelle, because I think that might be preventing you from, if I can, from seeing us. And I'm going to take the spotlight off of you and see if that will allow you to see us as well.
I do see you.
Oh, good. Yeah, I thought when you were into your talk that sharing might be the culprit. So let me turn the view to gallery. There we all are. And so that this panel is us in the room. And then the others in the tiles are people who are online remotely.
That's awesome.
So what I thought we could do is maybe go back and forth between online and in the room here and invite people to ask questions of Michelle. Hey, Michelle. So who would like to start? Let's start with somebody online. Does anybody online have a question for J Michelle?
Well, when you fish for them, do you strip it, or you let it sink and stuff? But you say they like current, so are you letting it just right in the current, or are you also stripping it in and in short strips or long?
Yeah, that's a great question. And now that we can see each other, I can demonstrate. So, which I was doing so well when I was talking to y'all, but you couldn't see me, so it didn't matter. So first of all, they are in current that's moving differently than the rest of the water, right? So they're moving at a different rate, either slower or quicker than the rest of the water. What they're looking for is things that are sort of running around and sort of dodging and moving, right? Because they're looking mainly for our bait fish patterns or our worms, which also swim rather vigorously. So first of all, stripping, I'm going to strip about 14 inches. And I'm going to do it like 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, like that. I'm going to be erratic in my stripping. You know how, well, at least I do. I get in a rhythm when I trout fish around stripping. And that is like the kiss of death for these guys. So that's the first thing. That's the first thing about stripping. The second thing is that you cast out, we have an intermediate line and most often some sort of weight on the fly. And that's, so we cast out, and we're going to want to let that sink for a little bit. And in fact, I wager to say you're going to want to let it sink for a little bit longer than you think you should. But as long as you're not hanging up on the bottom, you're doing great. Because now you've just set yourself up for success for that erratic stripping. The only time, Jim, that I'm going to not strip is if I can't find a fish to save my life. I'm going to tie on a little soft tackle and I'm going to cast it right into that seam we're talking about. And I'm going to let the seam take it, and usually they'll crush it.
Good, thank you.
You bet.
So anybody in the hall here have a question?
What way to tip it that you use?
So Bob asked the question, what weight tippet are you using?
Well, I tend to use 10-pound Seaguar. That's sort of what I've developed into using. Were I going to do spools of like tippet tied together or a long continuous tippet, I wouldn't go any smaller. I wouldn't go any smaller than a 5. And also you're going to want to be conscious of what you're using there too, because cold water, right? Cold water, salt, and also cold temperatures. You're going to want to be using things that react well to that and don't become brittle and or get line memory or tippet memory when it's in colder water.
How long is your leader or tippet?
If I'm using a single hand, it's usually about, so if I'm using a single hand, like mine's 9.6, my tippet's gonna be, typically, or all told, is gonna be about 14 feet. And that's something you get to play with.
So we have a question in the hall here.
Have you ever fished the Nesteca?
I have not fished the Nesteca. I have been near the Nesteca. In fact, I was there last month with Shandy, actually. Near, but never fished it, no. Have you?
Well, that's where I live, so I have done a little bit on the Nesteca.
Love it. Are you finding coastal cuts there? I hear they're prolific.
Am I finding the coastal cut?
Yes.
Yes.
So if you have a question, if you have a question online, you'll need to unmute yourself. So feel free to do that.
I have a question, Tim. I'm raising my hand.
Yes, Shandy.
J Michelle, do you find, well, I mean, I suppose you don't fish much for coastals in Oregon, but do you think, are we assuming that the OP cutties have a different kind of personality up there than our Oregon ones are really finicky and they're smaller
Yeah.
compared to yours?
I'm gonna tell you the only things I know about Oregon versus up here. And I'm gonna tell you that, yes, it's different, not completely, but largely. And in Oregon, they tend to hang out more in estuaries than they do in the actual salt. And I mean, they'll be in the fish when they're spawning, but estuary seems to be, Oregon-wise, where they really hang out. They like that sort of brackish, and I don't know the reason. James Losey, who is our head fish biologist for Washington State Fish and Wildlife, he went to Oregon for his grad degree, and he's an avid, and he runs Coastal Cutthroat Coalition, and he doesn't know the answer. And that's something that we ask him all the time. Have you figured it out yet? Have you figured it out yet? But I will tell you also, there's a fly that in Oregon that folks use called the spruce. That ring a bell? Anyone?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yep.
Jim's nodding his head. Yeah, that apparently is really good for them in the estuary.
So mud, it would be kind of opposite for Oregon, right, in the estuaries, because they're basically brackish, muddy, silty.
Yeah, what this lends me to consider is that the food source is somewhat different. So there's something in estuaries that they're chowing down on that aren't necessarily what they're eating up here. That's going to be my completely layman's, completely not supported by science in any way. Never quote me. Yes.
We're
Yeah, there's
basically scientists.
There's a Bob Borden pattern that is used in the estuaries in Oregon, and it's the Borden special, but it's got a lot of hot pink on it, and sometimes it's got a little yellow.
Anybody in the hall? Any more questions in the hall? Raise your hand. I'll point the camera at you. J Michelle, we have a lot of non-andromedous coastal cutthroat here in the Willamette water shed. I was just fishing for them yesterday in the main stem and caught a lot of them. And
Nice.
by just swinging flies, they really seem to respond to that.
Awesome.
I did try some stripping.
Yeah.
They didn't really seem to like the stripping. They seem to like that, just that consistent swing. I'm not sure what it was, but so is there anything different about the non-andromedous fish that you know of?
So the person who's going to know the real answer to that name is Chester Allen, and he used to live in Olympia. He used to be my treasure. Now he's yours, apparently. He moved down to Bend somewhere, the nerve. But he published two really great books. One is on sea run cutthroats and the other is on West Slope cutthroats. And to be honest with you, I've not done a ton of research on my West Slope cuts. I know how to fish for them, say on the Yakima River, but I haven't really spent a lot of time, Tim, sort of comparing the two. But Chester has. So I'm going to suggest that I'll look it up, and because now I'm curious too. But Chester, if you want a definitive on both sea run cutthroat and West Slope cutthroat, his books are going to do you right.
What's his last name again?
Allen, Chester Allen.
Thank you.
He has a blog which is intermittently up to date called The Watery Planet. But he also, his other main passion is editing horror magazines. So, random facts about Chester.
Another question. I'm like the annoying student.
Please, Shandy.
Would you say that hatchery, cutthroat are kind of dumbed down versions of the wild, like steelhead are? Like,
So you know, our science currently, our fisheries science tells us that, or shows us that there's over 700 genetic changes from a wild fish when it's reared in a hatchery, and none of them are positive changes that we've discovered so far. They have the typical more susceptible to disease for lots of different reasons. More susceptible to not being able to eat as well in the wild for lots of obvious reasons. And then all the great things around, you know, being predated on in mass. So I'm going to say that, interesting question. And yeah, probably, but again, not a scientist. I do read a lot of stuff around hatchery and wild and what can be done,
but do you notice, because you're on the Cowlitz and the Lewis, do you notice the difference between the silver?
Yeah. So anecdotally, let me tell you, the cutthroat that I'll get into on like the Lewis and the Cowlitz are nothing compared to those cutthroat that I get into on the Boga Shield and the Hoe and the Soldeck. They're those guys up there are untouched by hatchery genetics and they're freaking voracious.
Yeah, awesome.
Questions? Paul? Any more questions online? Well, thank you, J Michelle. That was fascinating. Really appreciate it.
Oh, yes. It's really so great to spend time with y'all, and I appreciate your time and attention. That was really lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you, J Michelle.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Stay in touch and let me know how fishing goes, all.
Yeah.